What's up guys, I'm Zell and welcome to my guide to the third circle of the Pandaemonium raids, also known as the Party Finder Nightmare, or also P3S. Check out my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Zell, where I livestream my raids.
Also jump back here, 10 subs.
10 subs!
Oh shit!
And if this guide ends up being helpful, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Alright, let's first start with the prep. These are the markers my group uses. You'll also want to arrange partners like so. And you'll also want to have light parties made. Keep in mind that for my guide, Group 1 will have a priority towards North and West, and Group 2 will have a priority towards South and East. You'll also need spread spots for a leader mechanic when tanks/melees are separated from healers in range. On top of this, you'll have spread spots for the Fire Tornado phase, and they should look something like this. Okay, I know that was a lot. This fight is a big step up from P2S in difficulty in terms of speed of mechanics, DPS checks, and healing checks. Even worse is that this fight has notoriously bad coloring, which makes some mechanics a bit difficult to see. Good luck guys, and with that, let's get started. The fight will start with Scorched Exaltation, which is the generic raid-wide for the encounter. Then the boss will cast Heat of Condemnation. This will put out two tethers that the tank must grab and separate from each other and the group. Each hit is a tank buster and will leave a fire vulnerability up, so overlapping will instantly kill you. This happens intermittently throughout the fight, and it's best for the group to loosely stack in the center so the tanks can easily grab the tethers and separate them out. Experimental Fireplume has two different versions depending on the visual indicator on Phoenix. One version is indicated by a singular giant orb, which will bait a massive AoE on a random player. The second version is indicated by a cluster of smaller orbs, which will create a pair of rotating AoEs which will explode 4 times before exploding in the center. To handle this, have the party stack in the center while the Fireplume is being cast. Then check the indicator. If it's the big orb, you can simply move to the edge of the arena. This will normally force the melees to disconnect for potentially a GCD. This version does snapshot quite early, and it's possible to game the AoE, but personally, I found it hard to not lose any uptime. If it's the rotating AoEs, which I'll call the Shiva mechanic, look at where the AoEs start and move out accordingly. I like to run towards the second AoE explosion as it gives me enough time and space to be safe on the initial set of AoEs, but also not get hit by the other AoEs on the other side that's also spinning around the boss. This one is easier to keep melee uptime as you don't have to run out as far as the big orb. I recommend tanks pulling the boss initially to the wall so that for this first experimental Fireplume, you can retain melee uptime regardless of the cast. Also, you can make your ninja friend happy. This will be followed up by left or right Cinderwing, where Phoenix will do a 180-degree cleave on whatever side was mentioned in the cast. Since the boss is often pulled to the wall here and might be slightly angled, make sure to double check the orientation and try to not mix up your left and right. This also makes it a bad idea to dodge to the sides for the previous mechanic, as you might get unlucky and have to somehow manage to sprint the entire stage to get to the correct side. Next will be the first major mechanic, Darkened Fire. The boss will either choose the tank and healers or all the DPS to drop a Darkened Fire ad. If they are spawned too close to each other, they will tether and immediately explode, probably causing a wipe. They are also invulnerable due to a buff they have, which will be dealt with later. Shortly after the fires are dropped, the boss will cast Brighten Fire, which will put numbers on each player. Phoenix will then shoot a fireball at each player in order of the numbers. These fireballs leave a vulnerability up for a short time, so getting hit consecutively will kill you instantly. Each Darkened Fire must be hit by 4 Brightened Fires in order to remove the invulnerability buff. To resolve this mechanic, we first have everyone stand on the corners in between the markers with your pair. This guarantees that the Darkened Fires will spawn in the corners. Then, when players are assigned their numbers, go to your corresponding number marker. For numbers greater than 4, subtract 4 and go to that spot. So 1 and 5 will pair up, 2 and 6, and so forth. This will work because even though the higher numbers get the fire vulnerability debuff, it won't last until their number gets shot by the fireball again. After the fires are hit by Phoenix, we have each pair destroy the fires that are clockwise of them. Some classes will be able to cleave the fires, and for casters, if you can time it, you can pre-cast onto the fires as the fires are being hit to prevent the chance of having your cast cancel due to a fire dying too quickly. This section has a lot of damage, so it's a good idea for everyone to contribute towards mitigation. Healers should also use abilities like Seraph, Pandaemonium, and Liturgy of the Bell, which benefit from the multiple waves of damage taken by the party. After this, have the group stack south to help resolve the next heat of Condemnation. This will be followed up by a Scorch Exaltation. Then the boss will cast Devouring Brand, which will create a cross pattern that starts from the edges towards the center. This will restrict the movement for the next set of mechanics. For Experimental Fireplume, there are again two versions, either the Giant Fireball or the Shiva AoEs. Regardless of the version, you'll want to stack center to prepare for the mechanic. For the Giant Fireball, we simply move the entire party to the northeast corner on the edge to avoid the fireball. Any quadrant can work, so just make sure everyone goes together. For Shiva AoEs, we prioritize the north quadrant and move towards which quadrant the AoEs began from. Be careful while moving to the edge, as the rotating AoEs from the other side can clip you if you're too close to the left side while running. For either version, you'll want to make sure that the party is stacked after moving to a quadrant, as Searing Breeze comes right after, which will drop an AoE underneath everyone in the party. If the party was stacked at the edge, it'll be easy to just move into the boss's hitbox to avoid the AoEs. After this will be left or right Cinderwing, cleaving one of Phoenix's sides. There's a decent chance that the boss has rotated a bit here, so make sure to be careful. Have the group stack in the center of the arena in preparation for the upcoming heat of Condemnation to give tanks an easier time grabbing tethers and separating them out. This will then be followed by another Experimental Fireplume. As always, stack in the center and check which version of the cast it is. About 2 GCDs after the cast, the boss will go untargetable. As soon as Experimental Fireplume is done resolving, the boss will reappear at a cardinal still untargetable and cast Trail of Condemnation. Check the boss's heads to see which version of the cast it is. If the center head has a fireball, Phoenix will dive bomb through the center and each player will be hit with an AoE that need to be spread apart. If the heads on the sides have fireballs, Phoenix will dash through but leave the center untouched. Then, either the DPS or tanks and healers will be hit by an AoE that needs to be shared by another person. We use our partner pairing to resolve both versions of this mechanic. If the fireball is centered, have tanks and healers move relative left looking at the boss and the DPS to the right. Spread yourselves according to the layout of our pairings from our preparation. If the fireballs are on the sides, then stand centered with each of your pairs separated vertically. Once this is resolved, we move into the adds phase. There's a couple things I'd like to mention about this phase. Your damage in this fight does not count towards your parse on FF logs. This means healers should be focused on healing, and outside of running out of mana, it's fine to use GCD heals as necessary. Also, for the whole group, it is a good idea to hold your burst windows until after. The adds phase does have an enrage mechanic, but even week 1 people were able to hold burst windows, so this shouldn't be a problem outside of coming into the phase with damage downs or the death debuff. This also means you can concentrate your burst on the boss, which hopefully means not meeting the real enrage at the end of the fight. Adds phase will start by 4 small birds spawning near the center on each cardinal. We use color priority from your light parties to determine how the tanks will take aggro. We have Group 1's tank grab the north and west sunbirds, while the other tank takes the south and east sunbirds. Tanks should pre-position to immediately use a GCD on one bird and provoke the second bird to quickly take aggro on both birds. Then split into your light parties where the tanks will bring the birds into their corresponding cardinals and kill them. Make sure they aren't too close or they will give the boss a damage up buff, which will eventually kill you. If you take too long to kill the birds, they will cast Great Whirlwind, which will also kill you. For Party Finder, it's a good idea for tanks to have some kind of macro which will identify which target to kill first. During all this, there will be occasional blazing rains doing AoE damage to the whole party. After all the birds die, Phoenix will use Flames of Undeath, which will hit the party for a hefty raid-wide and resurrect all the birds, which will become even bigger birds. Be sure to head to the center for heals. Each sunbird will cast Fireglide Sweep and put out a bunch of tethers. Half the party will be tethered directly to the sunbirds, and the other half of the party will be tethered to the first half of the party. At the end of the cast, each sunbird will dash to the person they are tethered to first, and then dash to the person who was tethered to that first person. If you are hit with the tether while too close, you will die. If you get hit by multiple birds, you will also die. To resolve this safely is actually pretty simple. If you are directly tethered to the bird, move across the arena from the bird you are tethered to. If you are only tethered to another party member, follow the tether line to the sunbird and stand on that side of the arena. If everything goes well, everyone's tether should be purple, and no one should be too close to be hit by someone else's bird. If you are directly tethered to a bird, I like to readjust after the first dash in order to make the second dash safer, as it's easy to get clipped on the second dash. In theory, this should be relatively straightforward, but it is a major prog point in Party Finder, as there's quite a bit of individual responsibility, and the consequence of dying here can be brutal, as the DPS check on the big birds can be quite close if you're committed to not using bursts. Tanks have an additional challenge, as they should be careful to not overtake aggro on the birds that aren't theirs. This is important because as soon as the Fireglides are all done, the Sunbirds will immediately start attacking who they are aggro to. The tank should, like the first set, bring the birds to the cardinals they are assigned to, and light parties will kill the birds one at a time. Same thing as before, the birds must be killed away from each other, or it will give Phoenix a damage up buff and eventually kill you. The big birds do more damage than the small ones, so it's a good idea to at least pop Rampart as a tank to get through this phase safely. If all goes well and you successfully kill all the birds separated and not die to their enrage cast Great Whirlwind, the boss will hit the party with another Flames of Undeath and become targetable. After a short period of time, Phoenix will cast Dead Rebirth, which is a massively damaging AoE. Unlike Flames of Undeath, the boss is targetable here, so be sure to use mitigations like Addle, Feint, and Reprisal. This signals the end of the ads phase. From here, both tanks will be tanking auto attacks, so be ready to heal both tanks. To start this phase, have the party gather south of the boss for the next Heat of Condemnation cast. The boss will then cast Fledgling Flight. This will spawn 4 molar-looking things on 4 players. After a bit of time, they'll be placed and shoot out a cone in the direction their arrow is pointing. If they are too close to each other, they will explode, likely wiping your group. Simply place these ads on the cardinal numbers facing outwards and have the party stack center to be safe. Next, Phoenix will cast Experimental Gloryplume, which is basically an upgrade to the Experimental Fireplume we saw before. As always, for the Experimental Plume mechanics, start by standing in the center of the arena. After the initial animation where Phoenix will show whether it's a giant fireball or the rotating Shiva AoEs, there will be another animation shown in a darker color. If it's a giant dark orb, it will be a stack on a tank and a healer, and if it's multiple smaller dark orbs, it will be a spread where everyone will be hit with an AoE. Here we split the group into 2 parties. Group 1 will have the tanks and melee DPS, and Group 2 will have the healers and the range DPS. Group 1 will prioritize north and west quadrants, and Group 2 will prioritize south and east. For both the giant fireball and Shiva AoEs, have the group separate according to their group priorities and then either stack together or spread out. We have our spreads for the melee group look like a cross shape because the main tank will be pulling the boss to the edge. So assign a person to go back into the center and the other 2 players on the sides. For the range, you can spread however makes you guys comfy. Now comes another major mechanic, Fountains of Fire. This is an absolute fiesta, so I'll try to explain everything that's going on. First, there will be orange puddles that rotate clockwise that will spawn on opposite cardinals. The closest 2 players to the boss will get purple AoE markers baited onto them, and at the end of the Sun's Pinion cast, they will explode, turning into sunbirds that will tether to the baited player and leave them with a fire vulnerability up debuff. When the purple AoE is overlapped with the orange puddle will then detonate, dealing damage to the player inside of it. However, the player inside also gets granted a buff called Trickle of Fire, which massively buffs their healing. The sunbirds will then dash through at the tethered player. This will happen 3 times as the orange puddles rotate and new purple AoEs get baited. This is an insanely visually cluttered mechanic, but the resolution is actually pretty simple. To resolve this, we first start by having healers pre-positioned to soak orange puddles. We use the same priorities from the light parties from before, so one healer will take north and west, and the other will take south and east. For everyone else, my group baits the purple AoEs in this order: ranged, tanks, and then melee. This order doesn't actually matter too much as long as your group is on the same page. The first group will bait by overlapping with the boss's hitbox. Everyone else should be careful to not be too close to make sure the AoEs are baited onto the right people. As the ranged DPS get their purple AoEs, the next group, the tanks, should walk into the hitbox in order to bait the next set of purple AoEs. The ranged DPS will then position outside of the boss's hitbox in line with the healer orange puddles, setting off the healer puddle and summoning a sunbird. As soon as the sunbirds appear, move across the arena to turn the tether purple and be safe from the dashes. Meanwhile, the melee and tanks are resolving their set of purple AoEs, birds, and tethers, and the healers are moving clockwise and avoiding the bird dashes. Healers are going to be hit with massive damage every time an orange puddle ignites, but because of the healing buff, you should be able to heal yourself and others up to full very easily. Shield healers can produce massive shields, and Astrologists can use Neutrosect to get a similar result. Sorry, white mages, you just do what you can. By resolving it in this way, the most dangerous part of the mechanics, the dashing sunbirds, should be mostly mitigated. Following Fountains of Fire are 2 immediate back-to-back Scorched Exaltations. Healers should still have a lingering healing buff, so it should be pretty trivial to top everyone up with big shields and heal through this. Shortly after will be another Heat of Condemnation, which will bring us into the new phase of the fight. Phoenix will cast Firestorms of Asphodelos, which is a very hard-hitting raid-wide that will also summon 3 giant fire tornadoes in a triangular formation. Be sure to mitigate this cast. While in this phase, there will be intermittent blazing rains hitting the whole party like in the ads phase. During this time, have your party separate into 2 groups with the tanks and range DPS north and the melee and healers south. Right after, the boss will then cast Flames of Asphodelos, which will begin to section the arena into 3 sections in sequential order. If possible, stand in the 3rd section that appears and dodge into the 1st section. This will give you the most time to dodge the cleaves. As the cleaves are appearing, however, the boss will also cast an experimental Asphodelos. This will show the dark portion of the previous mechanic, experimental Gloryplume, and be either a single big orb, which indicates a stack mechanic, or multiple smaller orbs, which will be a spread. This is the reason we split the party differently, as the stack orb hits a tank and a healer, but also because if the Asphodelos is a spread, we can naturally split up with the ranged and healers staying away from the boss, and the melees and tanks can spread towards the boss. Right after experimental Asphodelos resolves, the boss will cast another Flames of Asphodelos, sectioning the arena into 3 parts. As Flames of Asphodelos is resolving, tank tethers will appear, and the boss will start casting Storms of Asphodelos. Storms of Asphodelos will cause each giant tornado to emit a huge cleave baited onto the closest player. The tank tethers work the same as Heat of Condemnation, and also 3 Proteans will be baited onto 3 closest players to the boss. Now, the current popular strategy is called the Elmo strat, but please don't use this strat. While it does resolve the mechanic, it requires some tricky positioning that can be messed up by minor positioning errors. Instead, I recommend using what is known as the Midas strategy for storms. The concept is simple. Have the healers bait the side tornadoes and a ranged DPS bait the north tornado. Then have both tanks take the tank tethers and group up on the northwest edge of the boss's hitbox. This will bait 2 Proteans to them. Remember to use your tank invulnerability or you will die. Then have the rest of the party stack south with 1 party member, like the melee DPS, to be on the hitbox of the boss with everyone just behind him. This will bait the last Protean. This strategy requires a lot less precision than the Elmo strat, making it much more consistent when progging. Again, please stop using the Elmo strat. After this resolves and everyone takes a ton of damage, Phoenix will immediately start casting Darkblaze Twister. Phoenix will tether itself to each of the tornadoes, however one of the tethers will be dark. Use this as the relative new north. Have the party stack center in preparation for Searing Breeze. Unlike the previous version of the cast, this will drop 4 consecutive baited AoEs under each player. We bait them with the first in the center, the second to the south of the boss, and then split the party into our fire tornado groups with the tanks and range going west of the boss and healers and melee going east. Then bait the AoEs towards north back to the tornado that had the dark tether. As this is happening, Phoenix will cast Experimental Asphodelos, which will again show either a stack or a spread indicator. Remember which version of the cast it is. Now, after the Searing Breezes have resolved, the party should be split half and half on either side of the tornado. The tornado will then knock back the party, and you should position yourself to be knocked towards the side tornadoes, as immediately afterwards, each tornado will blow up in a giant donut pattern. Right after the donuts go off, the Experimental Asphodelos will resolve in either a stack or spread, so make sure to move accordingly. After this will be another Scorched Exaltation, ending the Fire Tornado phase. We now enter into the final phase of the fight. Phoenix will begin casting Death's Toll, marking each player with a debuff with either a 1, 2, or a 4. This will be important later, so note which number you are. The boss will then cast Fledgling Flight, summoning these weird tooth things on 4 players. This time, however, players will want to point them towards the center on each marker. The boss will then cast Life's Agonies, so let's talk about the debuffs from earlier. Each time you take lethal damage, the debuff will go down by 1 until you remove the debuff, leaving you with an HP recovery down debuff. To resolve your debuff, if you have a 1, you want to stand on a cardinal to only get hit by one of the adds. If you have a 2, you'll want to stand on the inner cards to get hit by 2. If you have a 4, you'll want to sit center to get blasted by all 4. If you get hit by Life's Agonies while you still have a Death's Toll debuff, you will instantly die. This section is a massive heal check because every player will have an HP recovery down debuff, and the incoming Life's Agonies raid-wide hits very hard, if not just flat out wipe you if you are not fully healed. This mechanic can be trivialized by a healer LB3, or if you're an Astrologian, you can simply press Macrocosmos and heal everyone up to full because, well, Yoshi P just hates white mages, I guess. At this point, we have seen every unique mechanic in the fight. Following Life's Agonies will be the last experimental Gloryplume. Stack center to start out, and remember to split back up into your tank melee and healer ranged groups rather than the Firestorm groups. Following this will be another Trail of Condemnation, which will be resolved in the same way as before. The next set of mechanics will be the exact same as what we saw 2 minutes into the fight, with the boss casting Devouring Brand, which will cut the arena into quadrants. Phoenix will then combo that into an experimental Fireplume. Again, check which version of the cast it is, and the entire party will move together, as it will then be followed up by Searing Breeze. You guessed it, it's exactly like the beginning and will be followed up by another left or right Cinderwing. After this, Phoenix will cast 2 more Scorched Exaltations. Then, at last, will be the Enrage, which will be called Final Exaltation. And there you have it, that is the entirety of the fight. This fight is really tough, and congratulations to all those who managed to clear it. I hope this guide was helpful, and I'll be working on my next guide for the next floor of the raid tier. Hope to see you guys soon, and thanks for watching.